Welcome back, gentlemen. It's Sunday afternoon, and we are out on the open ocean. And the Pequod has apparently decided, Ishmaelville has decided to tell us more about butchering whales and collecting their oil. So once again, every once in a while, we just stop the action to learn more about whaling and sailing on the seas. So we've got chapter 77 here, the Great Heidelberg Tun, and Ishmael tells us that the sperm whale's head is basically a giant wine cask for this oil, and that's apparently where the most valuable and the purest of the oil is. And apparently, there's a pretty curious line here. There's a coin, and that's a term unknown to Euclid. Belongs to pure nautical mathematics, which is just awesome. So yeah, and the sperm whale's head is full of all of the finest of the whale oil. So this is a pretty short chapter, not a whole lot to it. Do you guys see anything interesting in it?
Well, I mean, I think he's continuing this snipe at science, which just find so much delight in. It's almost unbearable. He does such a good job at it. Yeah, there's a lot more science sniping, which I like, and that's sort of been the theme for the past few chapters. Unfortunately, I had to catch up today, so I did. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting that he's doing this this way. We'll say, but I approve. And I do like your Ishmaelville.
I stole that from Castle, just to be
that's
clear.
Yeah. Well, we all steal from Castle. Just don't tell him.
That's fine. I'll never know. One of the things I don't know, the most ridiculous thing with this Heidelberg ton thing, just imagine, especially since the head is going to be kind of raised up vertically in an upcoming chapter here, and this aspect of like standing on it and trying to maintain your footing. Apparently the actual Heidelberg ton is no longer being used as an actual wine vat, but that they actually built a dance floor on top of it. So there is a sort of aspect of like people dance on top of this thing now, and then we're gonna see a particular character coming up here pretty soon lose his footing up there. So I don't know. That's the only thing I caught in this chapter, honestly.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess it's worth saying, because I didn't remember. I mean, I've heard of it before. The Heidelberg Tun is a gigantic wine cask. It's the largest in the world. There have been 3 of them, and yeah, there it is, beautiful. And
there's a person up there for scale.
Yeah, this is the 3rd one. It holds something like 52,000 gallons.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is an impressive thing, right? And the Heidelberg family has been building them for however many hundreds of years.
This is what the top of it looks like. So I guess people go up there and dance.
I'd dance up there.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, if you're not going to enjoy wine.
Yeah, there's not a giant hole in the center.
I think if you enjoy wine, it makes you want to dance up there more.
Yeah, those two causes would seem aligned, and yet we have removed one of them and flattened the world.
Yeah. So when you think of sperm whales, just think of giant casks full of wine to cheer man's heart, and to full of the oil that makes his face shine. Yeah. So not much to that chapter. We can move on to 78 here. Cisterns and buckets. The sperm whales are far too large to actually bring entirely on deck. And so they've got to do all of these goofy things to bring the parts that they want on deck. So we've heard in a previous chapter about the orange peeling where they just kind of spin the whales around and strip off the blubber, putting that into a big cauldron of some sort and boiling all the oil out of it. But because the sperm whale's head is so full of oil, they actually just kind of cut it open and begin scooping it out with buckets, and it goes up bucket by bucket. And did he say it was 5,000 gallons of oil in a head? Do I remember that correctly?
I think that's accurate.
It's
Yeah.
maybe not quite as big as the Heidelberg tons, but that's still a lot of oil right there. And this is
It's the Heidelberg ton of whales.
of whales, certainly.
Yeah, I think he says that. So it's, he is accurate and precise for once. might be the only time.
And so we get this scene of Tashtego, one of the harpooneers. He's got to be, it's his turn to be the one who's standing on top of the whale while he's pulling very slippery oil out of its head and to fill the buckets up. And right as he was getting to the bottom of the sperm whale's cask, he himself falls into the the sperm whale's mostly empty head, and the head breaks loose and begins to drift underwater. And Dagu makes a solid attempt at saving him, but is unable to do so. And then MVP Queequeg dives into the water with one of those whaling spades, which is almost a hatchet, and it's really interesting. The whale's head isn't sinking that quickly; it's still fairly buoyant, so he's able to retrieve Tashtego from there. There's a curious point where Tashtego had got his leg free of the whale, and Queequeg pushed it back in and waited for him to be able to get a head to pull out, because apparently that wasn't going to go well. And I'm going to defer to the authority of Queequeg on this one, because he's the one who pulled off this ridiculous rescue and not me. So that was apparently the right thing.
I think actually he says he had his head and saw his leg come up first and decided this is bad and pushed him back down. But it's also worth mentioning they hadn't gotten all the oil out of the head yet. And apparently the oil that's left is very heavy and thick compared to the oil they had already extracted. And so the danger isn't like drowning and being unable to get out of a light oil that likely would have floated the head. The danger is all the heavy oil is already sunk to the bottom of the head because it was being held up like that. And he falls into that part of the oil. So that's also worth sort of noting. So this is like a catastrophic thing. And the impression I got from reading it was that like no one's coming back from this. That was sort of the impression that we were given, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too that he kind of goes into the aspect of the interior structure of it. So they need the spades, like that. You can't just open the thing up and then it's just this tub of oil or anything like that. It's a honeycomb type organ that's in there containing all of these things in the different compartments, I guess you could say, and that they have to cut in through that. And to the point where there's so much work involved that even Stubbs says, "Oh, are you like packing a cartridge or something like that?" For he's going like 15 feet deep or something like that into this thing, cutting holes. And so you also have this aspect of, and then he previously talks about how the shape of the head can change depending on whether it's up on the surface or if it's down below, depending on the pressure. So,
which I have to imagine is actually the function of all this oil, because sperm whales dive incredibly deep.
Yeah. And you're running into this aspect too of like it's not going to behave the same way that it normally does as well. So normally it would expand. I guess once you get underwater, like it's kind of that thing you have like like a plastic bag or something like that. And you raise it up, but then you have this thing of now all of those little structures are like closed in around him. So he's surrounded by all of these different things that are kind of like sponging to him. and who knows how that winds up behaving. And then, like Mark said, you have only the thickest part of the oil that has kind of settled at the bottom as well. But that was a funny thing where Queequeg like notices, oh, this is not correct, and he like flips him inside the whale's head to try to get him. As it says here, with the courage and great skill in obstetrics that Queequeg delivered Tashtego out of the whale's head.
Yeah, he that a leg was presented, but well knowing that it was not as it ought to be and might occasion great trouble, he had thrust back the leg, and by a dexterous heave and toss had wrought a somerset upon the Indian, so that with the next trial he came forth in the good way, head foremost. It's just, and then he uses all of this midwife imagery to describe this, and so we're getting yeah, the courage and great skill in obstetrics. Midwifery should be taught in the same course with fencing and boxing, riding and rowing. So those make me think of those are what the educated people learn. And yeah, and then he also compares it to falling into a cistern, and so that's the chapter title of the chapter, cisterns and buckets. So there's this great deep well that you can fall into, and it's like it's made out of fine stuff, it's made out of valuable stuff, but it'll still kill you if you're down there. And then at the very last of this, uh we got these like the best line is saved for every chapter closing here. How many think he have likewise fallen into Plato's honey head and sweetly perished there?
Right.
That's a real fascinating thing. And if you read excellent series of books, I don't think it was intended to be read all the way through, but you certainly can do that. The History of Philosophy by Francis Copleston. It's one of those old school Jesuits before they all got weird, and wrote a fantastic history of philosophy. When you get to the end of his section on Plato and Aristotle, which is a considerable portion of the book, he says basically between the two of them, you can have like kind of a complete philosophy, a complete understanding of the world.
Yep.
Plato gives you the forms and the ideals of all these things, and Aristotle teaches you how to bring it down into the world properly. And yeah, I think if you separate Aristotle from Plato, you are likely to get deep into the ideal form of things, and lose maybe a little bit of the practicals. But maybe he's just responding to people misapprehending Plato, which is also extremely possible and very easy.
Well, I think the point is deeper. I think the point is it's easy to read and stay in your head about philosophy forever. Which it's weird that he wrote it back then, since I'd say, boy, is that a problem we have right now in abundance. As with any work, I mean, you could even do it with that book you like so much, Father Eric. I mean, you can stay stuck in the quote philosophical, right? You can stay stuck in the realm of your head, where thoughts are all you have, and it's very easy to do. But it's the same as drowning in whale oil in the head of the whale while it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Yes. And also, I mean, obviously, obstetrics over and over again. What we're fundamentally talking about here is a rebirth. So I don't know how that's going to play in later on, but with all the foreshadowing we've had so far, I suspect that's going to be significant. And also that two come up, but even Queequeg's like worn out. So his sort of shiny superhero status has been put into question, I think, for the first time in the book. He's no longer this indestructible creature, right? The edges are showing, right? The limits are becoming more clear all of a sudden.
Even Queequeg's.
Right, Queequeg's limits, right? So
Yeah.
he's no longer this indestructible heroic figure that can do anything and shows no wear. So now we have where we have that fringe, that edge, that margin, and this is very much a margin story. Um, and it seems like this does happen. Losing whales and losing parts of whales, like it's not, you can expect one on the voyage, sort of a thing, right? Or one out of every 2 voyages. So that's kind of interesting because that'll come up later on too.
I wanted to just add a couple of quick things here. So one thing I read something when I was looking up the Plato's honey head thing, and I think this is also just kind of like a little supplementary little thing. There was some sort of little legend that was like, because people would say that Plato had honeyed words or something like that. That there was this legend that as like an infant or something like that, there was like a beehive that was made on his face or something, and which sounds horrifying, honestly. But I just liked a couple of the lines here. So we get some of those Ishmaelville fourth wall breaks where he goes and it's like, oh, the reader says, how could this be that the head sunk so quickly? And he's like, we have thee there, not at all, but I have thee, and it's just like, why are you arguing with yourself? But it's so much fun. And then he talks about the it being a running delivery as well, which is just like even more absurd of just like delivering a baby on the run. But and then he goes in his typical fashion and then romanticizes the horror, right? And says, oh, that if had Tashtego perished in that head, it had been a very precious perishing, smothered in the very whitest and daintiest of fragrant spermaceti, coffined, hearsed, and tombed in the secret inner chamber and sanctum sanctorum of the whale. Only one sweeter end can readily be recalled: the delicious death of the Ohio honey hunter. And it's just such a great line.
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? That he brings in a touch of romanticism, showing his literary skills, while at the same time criticizing romanticism as such, right? Because it's a very harsh, because he oscillates back, but right back and forth between the harsh realities of like, yeah, and then he's dead or he loses an arm or whatever horrible thing, right? And many a man is right, and that'll come up again too later. And this romanticized version of everything. So he's very much criticizing romanticism, which is a good catch, Castle. I think I had intuited it, but hadn't thought to make it that clear. But yeah, that's interesting that's there.
It's a fun move because he did it at least once before with
Yeah.
the guy who was the amputee, like the double amputee that was
Yep.
there with the painting, and then it's just
Yep.
like, oh, he actually romanticized the amputation and his like stoicism and not talking about his own amputation, even though he's like sitting on the side of the road showing how it happened. So there is also, it's like, is he criticizing it? Is he romanticizing it? A little bit of both,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember getting to the end of the Count of Monte Cristo in high school, and I wasn't all that terribly aware of life, the universe, and everything. But that's like a classic romantic novel right there. And thinking that the ending was just a little over the top. And I don't know. And let's take one 19th century novel at a time. But yeah, the criticisms of romanticism, I think, are well placed because it can get a little bit goofy at the extremes.
Well, and
All
that
right.
also harkens back to Plato's honey head. Because
Yes,
that's
gets
very
funny at
much,
the extremes.
yeah.
All righty. And now, Mark, in case you were really hankering for a little more poking fun at scientists and scientism, we get the best part of the 19th century here: physiognomy and phrenology. So if I recall correctly, physiognomist is measuring the shape of the skull, and
That's
phrenology is
phrenology.
measuring the shape of the brain, or did I have it backwards?
No, I think phrenology is the skull. I don't know what
Okay,
physio
and
actually is.
physiognomist
But
is probably just the shape of the body then?
I think it's the body, if
Yeah.
I remember
But that's
correctly.
like the best 19th century pseudoscience in the world right there, where they
Um,
it
can
looks like
predict
physiognomy
your
is face.
personality based on the shape of your head.
It looks like physiognomy is specifically the structure of the face.
oh, the face. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, uh, Not so pseudo, but sure, parts of it are. But actually, it's been revived.
There's probably with some of these 19th century guys a level of certitude that was not supported by the amount of data they had.
Yeah. I mean, they had all the same replication crisis problems back then that we pretend are new. It's worse now for sure, but that's a different discussion involving the evils of science, which it surely is. We won't go into that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like if you look into it, you're gonna find stuff. But yeah, this was the science of the day. Oops. Right. So much like maybe viral science or something today is a bunch of garbage. This is phrenology is the viral science of the 1800s. Sorry.
Like
and
a
actually,
YouTube channel or something.
I could go into that on navigating patterns. Yeah, I've done my evils of science stuff before. I'll do
Yes.
more for sure.
Did
Yeah,
you go
there'll be
into
something.
rabies? I'm not going to derail the whole thing, but
There'll be something on viral science for sure. And
gosh, looking
yeah.
forward to it.
That'll be there. Sure. Actual evidence, not faked up. Oh, we only looked here, so we only found it here evidence. So yeah, I mean, and again, this is very much, and the real problem for science is if you look at genetics, phrenology, and I mean, it has to be true to some extent. Otherwise, all of genetics is actually wrong. And like, people don't like that answer, but also, there has to be correlations, right? I mean, they're constantly doing this game of, well, this physical thing, right? Whatever it is, size of organ or size of rib cage or size of arm corresponds to more strength or a problem processing or the ability to process something that other people can't. They constantly do that in science, right? Constantly. And then they constantly roll it back, right? Because it's not quite right, but it's also not wrong because there's a correlation there. They just can't figure out what the correlation is and what the causation is. And so this is very much the same sort of thing. And I think, Melville's kind of noticing this. And one of the things he's been doing throughout the book, I would argue, he's been very skillfully re-enchanting the world by pointing out the paucity, if you will, of science, right? Or the poverty of what it can tell you about the world. And then showing you a better way. So that's kind of everywhere in the book, but in this part in particular.
Right, because he builds up, like at the very beginning of this chapter, like he's going to be engaging in this fine scientific pursuit of which all the greatest minds in England are currently engaged, and then he's just like, physiognomically regarded, the sperm whale is an anomalous creature. He has no proper nose.
Right.
You're like, okay, all right. Sperm whales don't have noses. But nevertheless, the magnitude, all its proportions are so stately that the same deficiency in which the sculptured Jove was hideous, in him is no blemish at all. Nay, it is an added grandeur, right? And the thing is I don't think the physiognomists that he would have been talking to would have agreed with him, but he's actually kind of correct because quantity has a quality all of its own, and sperm whales are gigantic and will inspire awe in you, regardless of whether or not there's a nose at the front of it.
Yeah, well, and he did this earlier. I mean, I think it was in last week's reading, but I'll drag it in here anyway. Right? He talks about how the eyes are on the side of the head, and then he talks about how that means he has two fronts. Right? Because what is your front other than what you can see? Right? And so he's doing that. Well, science would say that the front of the whale is somehow in between the eyes. Okay. But practically that's no use to you because something's coming head on at you and you can't see it. Right. And so he does that re-enchantment there, for example, and other places. But yeah. So he's going back, back down that road effectively.
I think it's especially funny that he goes and with that set of where the positioning of the eyes are. Then when he goes into phrenology, it's just nose and forehead. Like that's
Nose
all.
and forehead.
It's just the front, and that he does this thing where he says, therefore, though I am but ill qualified for a pioneer, in the application of these two semi-sciences to the whale, I will do my endeavor. I try all things, I achieve what I can. So it's just kind of like, oh, I'm just going to do what I can, and we'll see what I succeed at. And it's like that. I've seen that attitude before. Like those. And speaking of like the kind of, oh, we're just going to do things to the heads. Like that was one of the things that made me mad about the rabies thing, like the original papers on that. I don't know if you've seen any of those things, but it's just like, oh, we're going to demonstrate its transmittability by injecting like material from one supposedly rabid animal into the head through the skull of another one. It's like with a giant needle, and it's just like, yes, of course, that's how. And then they're like, well, see, it like, it didn't work out, so therefore, and it's just like, really, like that's what you're doing? You inject something into its head, but yeah, but they try all things and they achieve what they can.
Yes, in addition to not having a nose, the sperm whale has quite the prominent forehead, and as a prominent forehead enjoyer, that is surely a sign of great genius.
Indeed.
And because grass does not grow on a busy street castle. Just remember that.
Can confirm. Can confirm, by the way.
Fortune favors the bold.
Fortune favors the bald. Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
And then the sperm whale is a genius. And has the sperm whale ever written a book or delivered a speech? No, his great genius is declared, and he's doing nothing particular to prove it. It is moreover declared in his pyramidical silence. It's just pyramidical silence right there, where the pyramids are just there, and you can't ignore them.
I absolutely love just ridiculous, like the actual literally exalting of the foreheads of certain like historical characters. It said, few are the foreheads which, like Shakespeare's or Melanchthon's, I don't know who that is, rise high and descend so low that the eyes themselves seem clear, eternal, tideless mountain lakes, and all above them in the forehead's wrinkles you seem to track the antlered thoughts descending there to drink, as the Highland hunters track the snow prints of the deer. It's just so overdone.
Well, and the imagery and the way he links the imagery is so good. It's so fascinating how he does that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the genius of the sperm whale is in its silence. Um, there are certain things. That's a line in Francis Thompson's *The Hound of Heaven*. Is that he was? But I'm not going to be able to. I'm going to butcher it, but he was complaining that he couldn't have intimacy with nature the way he wanted to, and he says their speech is but silence. And yeah, it's okay, Mark. The poem has a happy ending.
That's it definitely does. If it talks about silence, yes.
Yeah, but the nature speaks by silences, basically like that. So pay attention to that because silence has a fair amount of power in it. You got to be careful.
I like also this aspect there of him saying, "Oh, genius in the sperm whale. Has the sperm whale ever written a book, spoken a speech? No, his great genius is declared and is doing nothing particular to prove it." And I can't help that Ishmael is maybe also kind of associating himself a little bit like this guy that doesn't do any work. It's like, oh well, it's actually the greatness is in the guy that doesn't do anything special. Like he shouldn't be drawing attention to himself. And then he goes and he dumps on the semi-science, as he calls it, then saying, physiognomy, like every other human science, is but a passing fable. And then he associates it with like reading hieroglyphics, and then says that you can read a forehead. It's just so silly.
All right. We move on to chapter 80, cooking right along. So now, we've done the physiognomy, right? The face. Now we're going to look at the phrenology, which is the shape of the entire skull there. And despite having a huge head, the sperm whale has a tiny brain because, as we've mentioned earlier, most of his head is is taken up by the spermaceti oil. But he spends quite a bit of time on the spinal cord of the sperm whale, and he notes, and I think this is actually a very good thing to note, is that the spinal cord in all mammals, as far as we can tell, is mostly just an extension of the brain's
Yeah.
operation throughout the rest of the body, and so you know it could be useful to distinguish them, but it is all kind of the piece there, and talks about how it's basically like equal girth all the way through until you start getting to the end of the tail there, um, and he equates that with what did he equate that with? I forgot what the conclusion of this chapter was. Anyway, more of this pseudoscientific stuff here.
I just want to point out the title of this chapter in relation to the previous one. So he's talking about the giant forehead, and the chapter is called The Prairie. And then he talks about the brain, and it's called The Nut. So it's just like this very ridiculous contrast between just like, oh, this superimposed as it would be. It's just actually that small and like almost impossible to find, to the point where some of the other whalers have actually said that the Heidelberg ton, if you will, was the actual brain, because no one had
Hmm.
actually, like, so few people had actually encountered the brain in like making the extractions.
Yeah, a lot of the talk here is of the spine and how the spine is the size of the brain, owing to all the connections it needs to make to this huge creature. Um, and Yeah, in this whole self-similar fractal section where it talks about the cranial cavity being continuous and the vertebrae um, taper in size, right? But he basically says that I think it's in this chapter. He says that basically a piece of the spinal column is a miniature skull,
Hmm.
effectively.
Yeah, I have it right here. He says it's a German conceit that the vertebrae are underdeveloped skulls. So it's like a
Right.
bunch of little skulls. And no, I should point out, when we're coming up to another chapter here, he dumps on the Germans for quite a while. So he's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
presenting it as like, oh, the Germans have this idea. That it's just like, well, we'll see how he feels about the Germans later.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a great line just beneath that too, where it says, "I believe that much of a man's character will be found betokened in his backbone. I would rather feel your spine than your skull, whoever you are. A thin joist of a spine never yet upheld a full and noble soul. I rejoice in my spine, as in the firm, audacious staff of that flag which I fling half out to the world."
Yeah. So yeah, again, he makes a correct sort of statement and then associates himself incorrectly to it. It's a
Yeah.
justification for his uselessness.
Alrighty, so he might not have that much brain, but the sperm whale has a great deal of spine, and that is very much worth considering. And there are some people who are not gifted with great natural intelligence, but still accomplish great things on account of having a great spine. So you pay attention to that, you watch it because it might become important.
Right.
We're coming up on the longest chapter here of our reading, chapter 81. The Pequod meets the Virgin, and they encounter a German whaling vessel, the Jungfrau, which I think just means like that might just be the German word for virgin, but means kind of literally young girl there. Derek de Deer. And the Jungfrau does not have any oil on board. Mark, does that seem significant to you at all?
Um well, I mean,
Uh,
the author's spinning it in a number of significant ways, that's for
okay,
sure.
okay, but you don't. It doesn't immediately say like, "Oh, I know what he's doing here." You don't pick that up?
Not to me, no.
No. It's because you don't read the Bible. That's why.
Probably.
There were 10 virgins. 5 of them were wise, and 5 of them were foolish. They went out to meet the king for the wedding feast. They all brought their lamps, but only the wise virgins brought oil for their lamps. The king was long delayed, and night fell. But then at midnight, the cry was raised that the king was coming. And the foolish virgins tried to trim their lamps without the oil, and it wasn't working. So they went to the wise virgins and says, "Hey, could we have some of your oil?" And the wise virgin says, "There might not be enough for both of us. Go get some of your own." And then the king arrived, and they went into the wedding feast. And the 5 wise virgins went in, and the foolish virgins were locked outside. So stay awake. You do not know the hour when your Lord is coming. It's from that short book that you don't read, or the book with the short title that you can't remember.
Short title and no author. How can anybody remember these things?
Right.
And cover art? Hello. Hello. I have a visual memory, Father. Why are you doing this to me?
Well, I just told you a great story that you can just remember now. You already have it memorized, at least in its essential points there. So,
True.
yeah, if you don't think that Melville knew that story, then I've got news for you. So, the young Frau comes begging for oil, and the Pequod's going to give them a little bit of oil, right? There might have been some kind of exchange, a little bit of cash, or maybe something that the Pequod needs. But then they sight a whale, or actually a pod of whales, and so they both ships drop everything and go after it, and they're competing to get the same of the largest and the oldest of the whales. So it wasn't like one of them was going to go after one of the younger, faster whales, but this large, old, slow whale is both what they're going for. And there's a chase sequence, and the 3 boats of the Pequod are behind the captain's boat of the Jungfrau, and they actually like throw their harpoons over the Jungfrau, which is pretty cool. And the Pequod ends up taking this giant old whale, and but when they get it back to the boat, they find that it's one of these random whales, and this happens apparently often enough where like they're not shocked by it, where it has no buoyancy left. They're really not sure why exactly it is, because it's not just that this whale is old; they've taken young whales before, and those whales have no buoyancy. But basically, trying to actually extract the oil from this whale is going to be impossible. It's going to capsize the Pequod, so they have to cut it loose, which I'm sure is not what they want to do. But the Jungfrau goes after finbacks belonging to a species of uncapturable whales. So, in case you think I'm being a little harsh on these, the Jungfrau, they seem quite foolish to me.
Yeah, a number of things stand out to me, and thanks for giving me that story, because boy, does that add depth to this chapter that it wasn't there before. Um, Sort of the first thing we notice is the miscommunication when the captain comes over. Right, the captain like is trying to ask for oil, and Ahab's like, "Have you seen a white whale? Have you seen a white whale? Have you? Have you? Have no, white whale? Hello, white whale." And then the captain's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And now all of a sudden they can get their oil, right? But it's like Ahab's sort of priorities come first. And then interestingly, what happens in the chase is, very unusually, the captain is like, "I'm going after that whale now. I am not stowing the oil on board," which we already know is dangerous, right? Because the little boats capsize all the time. Like you have 50-50 chance on those puppies coming. So the oil is not set on the big ship yet, and he's just like, "Screw it, we're going after." He's way out in front, and then I don't. Melville says he hits a crab, and I'm like, what? I don't. I mean, maybe I don't. That didn't make any sense to me at all. And maybe crab is just a generic sort of phrasing for I hit something that slowed me down. But I can't see even a large crab slowing down a boat like that. But that slows him down. So it's not that he's not in front. To your point, the Germans are still in front. And there's this race on, but it's very clear that the Pequod crew is winning the race in all 3 boats. So they're like right behind the captain, who had a huge lead. And his lead is only foiled by hitting this crab or something.
It
getting
got
caught up.
on the crab clung to the oar of one of the rowers, and the guy like spent a bunch of time
Oh, I
getting the
see.
crab off of the
Getting the
oar.
crab off. Okay.
Yeah, and so that probably just shook the whole crew up. So anyway, like you just keep on rowing. That's a little extra resistance there, my dude. But he might have been kind of dumb,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
exactly.
felt like he needed to take that off.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of unforced errors, I would call. This is like the chapter of unforced errors. And so yeah, there's all these unforced errors. And then yeah, it's like the resplendent superior crew shoots harpoons over the heads before they can even get their harpoons ready and into the whale. It's like, wow, that's right after slaughtering romanticism, we're right back there in some sense, right? Just to prove whatever point he's trying to prove here, which I don't pretend to quite understand. But yeah, I guess he doesn't like Germans.
It's not. I like in kind of the second page there where he's talking about it seems odd for a whale ship to be borrowing whale oil from another ship, and then he mentions the whole carrying coals to Newcastle thing, and that aspect of that there were so many coals there, but there is actually interestingly about this like spine versus skull thing. I remembered hearing some story about a guy who was like notoriously not very smart, but he was just really confident. And there were some guys that he was somewhat wealthy, and these other people were trying to get him to like waste his money so that they could take his position in something. And so you would take their advice and they'd give him ridiculous advice, and it like always worked out. And one of those things they gave him advice on was to sell coals to Newcastle. Like the saying was there. And he was like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll send some boats out full of coal. And he actually did it. And it turns out that they arrived right when there was a shortage. And they actually bought all of it. And he became absurdly rich as a result of that. And it's just like, it's just full confidence. He had no idea. He had never heard the saying before. He didn't even realize these people that call themselves his friends were trying to screw him over. But, it's like just going in with total confidence worked for that guy. There's probably survivorship bias, but even still, it's a fun example. Another line that I thought was great. He's describing this whale that they're chasing after. So it has all these different infirmities. Like it's super old. It's
Right.
It's afflicted with the jaundice, and it says that he says, oh, think of having a half an acre of stomach ache. That this thing it's floundering around. It only has one fin. It's all covered in all kinds of weird growths and everything like that. To the point where when they eventually cut it open later on, they even find like actual like full-sized harpoons, and even like a stone-tipped one.
2 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that it had completely healed over. Like there was no sign of it on the outside, and that this thing was just so packed with. So it's like who knows what else was in that thing. But to Father Eric's point, like if there was, they had younger ones that did the same thing too. So just what the heck.
Yeah, I wonder if it has anything to do with the whale's lungs at the time of death, but never mind that.
Yeah, well, and the fact is that it also goes through this dive. And at the very last minute, when they should have probably have already let go, it comes up. Right, which is very interesting imagery. Like, oh, he's on his kind of his last, we should let go of the rope. And they're like, nah, bro. And like the bows of the boat are like just touching the edge of the water. And then all of a sudden the whale comes up.
Yeah. And I think he even says that something like it was so well known that sometimes the whalers would actually put like buoys attached to it and like these different things because they knew within a couple of days like gases would start to kind of
Right.
generate, and if there was enough flotation devices on it, that it would eventually have enough help to kind of go
And
up.
they would be able to just watch it
Yeah.
and watch it come back up.
Well,
Yeah.
he mentions all that. He mentions that, sometimes days later whales just pop to the surface,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And it's interesting too. The thing about uh the thing about the stone-tipped spear in him, basically, uh he says, probably older than the United States. And I found that an interesting reference, right? Because basically he's contrasting the Germans, right? And there's probably something there that he's sort of getting after.
Yeah, yeah. Like this old whale had been able to survive a lot of the old world, but
Yeah.
it was these superior American with their superior technology and their know-how, right? Because it's not just the technology, it's the know-how as well. It was finally able to bring down this old whale, but they weren't able to hold on to it because it's one thing to get it, it's another thing to keep it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, and yeah, that's more foreshadowing because it's mostly a white whale, isn't it? Too. It's sort of
It's like
Discolored.
jaundice and like,
jaundice.
yeah.
It's sort of this halfway to white.
Yeah.
Very, very strange. Also, he had mentioned, I think it was earlier, I don't think it was this chapter, but he had sort of mentioned like the contrast between the countries, right? Like, oh, the Germans are very old whalers, and but they can't do what we do, right? They don't have the tech, to your point. But like he mentions that explicitly. So it is part of the book to kind of mention, yeah, these guys have been around a long time whaling, but they suck at it, and we're just better, and too bad. And yeah, American exceptionalism goes back to Melville.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that not only so like the whale pot or the oil pot that the other captain has is actually thrown out like in like even like oh you don't even need the pot like he just completely throws the entire thing out in just this extreme hubris. But I thought it was interesting that not only are they getting rid of their light and everything, but it's found after they kill the jaundiced whale that the weird like kind of crustacean overgrowths and everything that are on it actually even completely covered its eyes. So the thing was totally blind as well. So you have they're
Right.
throwing away their light and then they're chasing after this blind, disabled thing, already. And but yeah, there's something there with kind of like the old civilization thing or like pre-civilization, and then this aspect of a lot of times when whales die, like they do sink all the way down, and they call them whale falls. Like you have the bigger animals like the sharks and stuff will eat the bigger parts of the meat, but then eventually you have all these tiny little organisms that it turned into like a downtown bustling city. Like if you ever see some of those things, it's like it becomes the bones
We've
are
got
like
incredible footage of
skyscrapers.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've probably seen the same like Discovery Channel documentary. It's
Yeah.
really cool. I remember watching that in like third grade and thinking that was
Yeah.
awesome.
The aquarium that I volunteered at, but the year that I wound up having to move and I couldn't volunteer there anymore, they had a big exhibit that they came out with where they recreated the structure of part of a whale fall, and then they put all of the organisms that would normally be in there, so you can actually see like a little slice of this little whale fall, and it's like a tiny little city. It's very fascinating.
No part of the whale is wasted.
No.
Yeah,
And
and so there's definitely some social commentary here about the blindness of the old world relative to the advantage of the new world or something, for sure,
he
which is
even
kind of
says it right
fascinating.
here. He says, "For all his old age and his one arm and his blind eyes, he must die the death and be murdered, in order to light the gay bridals and other merrymakings of men, and also to illuminate the solemn churches that preach unconditional inoffensiveness by all to all." So it's like, yeah, that's some heavy, heavy commentary right there.
Yeah. So the young Frau is foolish and ends up cast out into the outer darkness where there is wailing and grinding of teeth. So stay awake and be ready, because you do not know the hour which the Lord will return.
Yeah. And then this chasing of the Finback, this worthless chase. Yeah, it's very, yeah, they're chasing after the wrong thing, effectively, right? They've got the wrong telos, and that sort of trips them up. Make Final Cause great again. And that trips them up. So
Even the last line, it says, "Oh, many are the Finbacks and many are the Derricks, my friend." So yeah, that's
right,
for
right.
sure.
That's life. That's life. And it should be noted that the Pequod isn't afflicted by that.
No, right. It's the contrast is between a lack of good telos and an abundance of bad telos.
Oh, yeah, those are not quite the same thing.
And a lack of
Blackfins-
discernment, right?
Yeah.
Because but the Blackfins are mistaken for, but only by bad whalers, right? They're
Right.
mistaken for good whales. So there's a discernment lesson in there as well. Yeah, there's a lot of this showed up earlier too in last week. There's a lot of meaning crisis stuff sitting right here for you.
It was all there in 1853.
Yep.
You had eyes to see. And yeah, chapter 82, the honor and glory in whaling. Ishmael wants to make this point again about how whalers are the best, and not to be trifled with. And so goes through a whole list of antique whalers, and he reimagines the legend of St. George and the Dragon as happening in the sea. He's like riding on a porpoise, and which is that's pretty special. And then makes a claim that Hercules was actually swallowed by a whale, which I'm not that well educated in Greek mythology. Did that actually happen?
I don't think so.
And even if so, he says that it qualifies him for being a whaler, which is just even better of a point. It's just like, well, he didn't actually do anything to the whale, but it still counts.
Right.
There
Well,
was a
but
whale involved.
there's a lot going on here, right? Because effectively what Ishmaelville is doing is he's tying together the Greek mythos, the Indian Hindu mythos, and I'm missing one.
Like the saints.
Yeah, and the right, and the biblical mythos, the Jerusalem mythos, if you will, with the
He is going to do the next chapter is called Jonah historically regarded. So we're going to get the Bible in there too.
no,
It's
but
just
the
the very
Bible's
next
in,
chapter.
but the Bible's somewhat in here.
Right.
He's tying that all together to the Western tradition. But you'll notice that the first sentence of this chapter is fascinating to me. The first sentence of this chapter is worth highlighting, because that, I think, is where all the money is.
I literally did highlight it, actually.
Right. Yeah, there are some enterprises in which a careful disorderliness is the true method. And so again, you see this fight with science, right? While at the same time, I would argue he's engaged in a very scientific endeavor in the early days of it, because in the early days of science, I mean, it's not really science. Science is the disorderliness through experimentation, because that's actually disordered, contrary to what the science idiots will tell you, that leads to engineering. And it's the engineering that does all the magic, but that's ordered. But to get to the order, you have to go through the disorderliness. And I think that's being highlighted here, which is why he goes from basically a scientific critique right into the next paragraph, which is, this idea of community, right, that he's wrapped up in, right? I am transported with the reflection that I myself belong, though but subordinately, to so emblazoned a fraternity. Right? And then he jumps into the mythos tying together stuff, which is kind of all over the place. But yeah, he's very much rewriting a bunch of mythos just to get to get into that, right? To get into that area.
I think so. This is something that I've had it on my mind for a while this week, and I mentioned it a bit in yesterday's book club. That thing of I heard that great line of advanced techniques are just rookie mistakes done on purpose, and that sort of thing of like, oh, you get into like some kid starts learning guitar and he's doing it a weird way, and it's like, oh, this is my style. It's like, no, it's not. You haven't even learned the basics. But also, when you've learned the basics, then you can do that. Like you can go back and do the more stylish stuff. And I just think it's funny that he associates that sort of aspect of, okay, we're not just disorganized cannibals, destroying each other or anything like that, but we're also not the normal guys that I'm dumping on constantly, and then but then he kind of associates, okay, the disorderliness that is careful is something related to heroes, prophets, and demigods, and then of course
Right.
just a little bit.
That's the only sensible way to do things. So you think about trying to plan and trying to discern.
Hmm.
When you're trying to plan something, part of it, and it's absolutely uncapturable, but it's extremely important. Part of it is the need to know when you're done planning.
Right.
I'm sure you've all met people who just sit and worry and worry and worry and worry and can never make a decision. Like there has to be a part of you that is able to cut the discernment off, to say we're no longer considering this. We're now moving into action. We are reducing the potential in our mind to an actual intent and movement in the world there. And so that's all that careful disorderliness is. You're not just rushing out there without discerning at all, but you're not going to try and plan everything to the point where you it becomes utterly inefficient and you don't actually end up moving there, because you'll
Right.
never be able to plan for every possible contingency, but you can plan for like the 80% of them that are likely to happen, and then just have some skill to deal with that the rest of the 20%.
But that's the same. Like that's actually the same as Plato's honey head. Right.
Like that's how you avoid it.
No, it's the same statement. Like you can get trapped in planning. That's Plato's honey head.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Reading Plato over and over again and looking for quote answers to things, which is something he tells you not to do, by the way. So if
Yeah.
someone's doing that, they're not reading very well. Put it that way. Their reading comprehension is quite low. Then it's the same problem, right? And so again, you see the scaling up of the points he's made earlier into the more pragmatic, right, in the way of planning. Like, because planning is all about trying to know things before you do them. And that's a ridiculous thing to even attempt.
Well, there is a need for a certain amount of planning, but you have to know when you're done planning and you need to go execute. A great general is going to do a lot of planning, and then he's going to go out on the battlefield and he's going to deal with whatever actually ends up happening. But he's got the plans together, he's got people where they need to be. He's given them a certain amount of instruction, and then you go from there. I'm relating it to my own life. That's what planning liturgies is like.
Yeah.
We've got everything set up. We run the rehearsal, right? We tell everybody this is what we're doing. And then when you get in the middle of there, you just kind of have to be able to roll with whatever happens, because people are going to forget. Somebody's going to do something that somebody else was supposed to do. So now they need to, and you just start. And then we do this without shouting at each other. We do this while looking angelic. So yeah, that's careful disorderliness right there. That's most liturgy right there, is careful disorderliness.
And the less you draw attention to it, the less blaringly obvious any sort of mistakes look like. So you have that nice continuous element, of it. And you mentioned generals. It reminds me, General Patton said this thing like a good plan executed violently is better than a perfect plan
Yeah.
made executed next week. And it's like there's an example of a guy that he executed some plans that didn't work how he intended to, but his ratio was pretty good. So it's just like, and also the ones that he didn't execute well, like, could you really outplan that? Like the stuff that messed up his good plan executed violently, could you really get around that? I don't know. Some people can say they did, but I mean, we'll see.
And so Ishmaelville is drawing together, the Greeks, the Hebrews, and the Indians, and saying that which you can find embodied in the whalemen is the basically heroic spirit of the entire world there, this careful disorderliness. Um, yeah. And
I
I
just
think the whalemen actually do pull it off because they have a certain amount of planning. They have a certain amount of, you just remember all of those chapters ago. We talked about all the stuff they're bringing on and all of the backups on the gear. And then they go out there and they contend with an animal 100 times, 200 times their size, standing on a child's boat.
I just want to talk briefly about the St. George and the whale scenario. I really want to get that commissioned, honestly. But I would so have that, honestly. But or maybe even there's probably some AI that I could have do it. It wouldn't be as special though. It would be better.
We have an artist. We have an artist.
Yeah. To fork up like $400 to just do a really nice, just let me just occupy all your time and attention. But I like that he says here it would much subtract from the glory of the exploit. So not only does he say, oh, I maintain it was a whale, but now he's saying, oh, the traditional version, that would actually it would subtract from the glory of the exploit had it been a crawling reptile of the land instead of doing battle with the great monster of the deep. And he says St. George's whale might well have crawled up on the sea on the beach. And considering the animal ridden by St. George might have only been a large seal or a seahorse, it wouldn't be incompatible with the sacred legend. And I don't know. It's the idea of him just fighting a beached whale is just so over the top. But it was a really good way to kind of cap off our reading this week, I think. But yeah, and then just that line for Hercules, the involuntary whaleman, is just like just he'll just the same thing as as like Queequeg, where it's like, oh, we don't let cannibals on unless they have papers, but also if they can throw a harpoon pretty well, then you can chuck the papers too. It's just like we'll take anybody at this point. You're getting added to the list.
A little bit of careful disorderliness there.
Yeah, I can't find any reference on the Hercules whale thing.
Well, that doesn't matter. Ishmaelville's claiming him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. Didn't he?
Part
And
of
then
the plan now.
the club that he made up in his head, he even he sets it above an actual order of knights, doesn't he?
Yeah. He is completely bonkers, actually.
And yet we read it.
Yeah.
It is impressive that he's that bonkers about the whole
Yeah.
And tying everything together, I thought was it's yeah, I'm not sure what he's on about there. He's clearly got something going. I mean, it's more foreshadowing, right?
Did we actually do this in an hour?
I think we did.
We did, which is
We're
sort of
we're
amazing.
past set and settings, so I think things just move a little more efficiently.
Yeah, are we? Though that'd be interesting if we're done with set and setting for the remainder of the book. But
We'll see.
I do appreciate how he's very cleverly and carefully, to some extent, feeding the reader exactly no more than they can handle. Although, having said that, do not read this book on your own ever. What a mistake that would be. You're just gonna miss too much of it for sure. Yeah, you're gonna miss huge portions of very interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Alrighty then. Well, uh, stay on the land. Don't go after any whales unless you've carefully prepared for it. And I think I will see you guys next week.
Excellent.
Take care and God bless.
You too.